Welcome to our CSS 2026 Current Affairs series, guided by Sir Zohaib Unjum. Today, we are tackling a complex prompt, critically examining Pakistan's democratic trajectory through the lens of institutional theory. This timeline maps Pakistan's national elections since 2008, tracking an unbroken chain of constitutional continuity and regular handovers of civilian power. But overlaying a trend line for actual civilian autonomy shows a flat trajectory. Despite regular elections, true democratic consolidation remains elusive. The electorate consistently participates. Millions of citizens show up, proving that the formal mechanisms of democracy are active and heavily utilized. To understand why this participation fails to translate into structural power, we need to look past the ballot box and apply institutional theory. This conceptual scale illustrates the core friction in governance, the constant push and pull between the formal rules of a written constitution and the entrenched, informal power structures operating behind the scenes. When those informal networks possess overwhelming organizational capacity, they systematically override the written laws. The result is a facade democracy. Outward electoral processes operate normally, but they merely mask an underlying, rigid authoritarian machinery. Pakistan operates under a hybrid governance model. Elected institutions exist, but their capacity to govern is permanently constrained by unyielding, informal vetoes. The Pakistan Institute of Legislative Development and Transparency, in its 2025 assessment, confirms the existence of this hybrid regime, classifying it as a system defined by institutional incoherence. Rather than a clear separation of powers, multiple state entities exercise overlapping authority. This design intentionally blurs the lines of absolute civilian control. The judiciary frequently wades into this overlap. Courts, regulatory bodies, and security agencies repeatedly intersect, creating competing mandates. This jurisdictional chaos prevents democratic norms from taking root. When it is unclear who holds final authority over a policy, civilian supremacy remains entirely theoretical. That same incoherence infects the electoral process. Holding an election does not inherently create a level playing field for the competing parties. Documented allegations routinely surface regarding pre-poll engineering and post-poll manipulation, where outcomes are shaped long before the final vote is tallied. These repeated manipulations actively destroy public and institutional trust in the formal rules of the state. When the rules apply unevenly, formal elected bodies are inherently weakened, leaving actual governance to be intercepted by non-elected forces. The most potent of those non-elected forces, and the primary veto player in the state, is the military establishment. A 2025 analysis from the Middle East Institute points directly to the military's iron grip, noting its unassailable supremacy in shaping the country's governance outcomes. This supremacy is maintained through a strict security-first governance paradigm. State policy is overwhelmingly evaluated through a security lens rather than a civilian or developmental one. This paradigm is backed by massive organizational scale. The military apparatus possesses hard power legitimacy and operational capacity that civilian sectors simply cannot match. External pressures actively reinforce this setup. For example, border clashes between India and Pakistan in May of 2025 were utilized to validate and deepen this internal power imbalance. This flowchart illustrates the cycle. A security crisis bolsters the military's legitimacy, reinforcing the security-first paradigm and creating a continuous loop. This closed loop barricades the pathway to autonomous civilian development. The military holds a structural advantage in resources and perceived necessity. When one institution possesses this level of superior organizational capacity and acts as a de facto veto player, the number of election cycles becomes irrelevant. The balance of power remains locked. But civilian institutions also bear responsibility. Political parties suffer from severe internal deficits of their own. Major Pakistani political parties remain fiercely personalistic. As evident in political rallies, they are structured entirely around charismatic leaders rather than ideological platforms. Because power is concentrated in a single figure or family, these organizations suffer from a near-total lack of internal party democracy. Without internal mechanisms to debate and elevate diverse voices, parties fail to aggregate broad public interests. They cannot sustain long-term programmatic politics. This creates what political scientists call institutional stickiness. Instead of evolving, outdated and informal non-democratic practices stubbornly gum up the system. Rather than passing legislation, political survival relies on patronage networks, floor crossing, and extra-parliamentary bargaining. The ultimate victim of these practices is the core democratic institution itself, the parliament. Parliament becomes marginalized. Its primary oversight functions are bypassed, with key security and economic policies negotiated entirely outside the legislature. By failing to routinize democratic norms within their own ranks, civilian parties hollow out the very legislature they claim to champion, rendering it incapable of countering the military veto. All of these factors converge into our final theoretical concept, institutional path dependence. Looking at this model, historical data points like past military interventions and weak party structures have worn a deep groove into the system. Past actions strictly narrow future possibilities. Any attempt to branch off toward a fully civilian-led order is forcefully pulled back into the established trajectory. Pakistan is stuck in a highly stable hybrid equilibrium. The system rigorously defends itself against both full democracy and overt total authoritarianism. Which brings us back to our CSS 2026 exam prompt. Why has democratic consolidation remained elusive? First, institutional incentives and patronage networks within the civilian sector remain largely unchanged. Second, the system is permanently bottlenecked by entrenched informal veto players who regularly override constitutional boundaries. And third, the enduring security-first governance paradigm inherently suppresses civilian autonomy and institutional development. For CSS and PMS guidance, or to enroll in our current affairs classes, reach out to Sir Zohaib Anjum's team on WhatsApp at 0311 144 44734. Repeated electoral transitions are often just a change of personnel. True consolidation requires breaking the institutional path dependence of the state itself.